are. Where I am, it's 1 o'clock Pacific Standard Time on February the 29th, 2020. I'm Emily Windsor Craig, and this is History Reset, which is brought to you each Saturday by People's Internet Radio in Ireland and Radioactive in Israel, to bring valuable information to the public that corporate media refuse to divulge. This program is a public service, but you are welcome to please donate to People's Internet Radio to keep the people's truth coming at you without commercial adverts. Today's History Reset is a whole new series, all right? It's about time and method in our universe, which is a personal experience of the soul. Planets don't experience anything. Moons don't experience. Souls experience, okay? And as you know, over the past umpty-ump months, I've referred to this list of books, this stack of books. And let me go through them again, all right? This one, the OSB, has the name of Jehovah, okay? The planet, who is the planetary sovereign, according to the Urantia book, but they call him Yahweh. And in the Bible, on Psalm 83:18, in every Bible, every translation, the name of God is Jehovah. But then there's this book. This one comes by Ashayana Dean. And so what I've been doing for some years is trying to make Voyagers 2 and this stack of books, which we know also includes the Sumerian cuneiform tablet history of the Anunnaki genetic engineering of humans in 208,000 BC. Okay, that includes this too. But how does this fit in? And I have my personal guidance. And my personal guidance is Enki the Anunnaki, because he and I were related a long time ago. We were in the same family. And so we have been able to continue at least chatting, you know. So he's been guiding me through this long history because he's been here a long time. Now, this book here, the Voyagers 2, is an authorized history given by the Guardian Alliance to Anna Yates or Ashayana Dean, okay? And I don't know, I welcome anybody who wants to get into any of these books, okay? Because I've been delving into all of them now for 20 years, and I'm trying to make sense of how they fit together and how we get the larger perspective. Our problem with our Bible, and I love our Bible because it tells us how to behave in order to either ascend or experience salvation, okay? It's our walking papers, how to be a good person, how to be an honest person, a decent person, a person that the higher minds considers worthy of continuing a life, okay? There's no double dealing in the Bible. There's no protection, tax, racketeering. There's no divide and conquer. There's no treachery advocated in the Bible, okay? There's no fraud advocated in the Bible, all right? There's no charity racketeering, all right? There's no crime that's advocated in our Bible. Now, I'm not going to say anything else about the Quran except that it has a different point of view about behavior. All right. Now, this book, Voyagers, doesn't talk about behavior at all. And its content, it just goes on and on and on and on and on. And I struggled with, how come there's all this content, but they're not paying any attention to what's happening here? And it occurred to me that the Guardian Alliance somehow, who brought forth this wonderful book about the whole universe, isn't aware that Earth is no longer traveling on the ecliptic of the Milky Way galaxy. The Guardian Alliance is not aware that Earth, Nibiru, and Tiamat got into a destruction derby about 52,000 years ago, and that where we live is on the remnant of that collision, which is actually not on Earth at all. Earth was a crystal that shattered and became the asteroid belt. We live on the energy torus of Tiamat, which has crashed onto the floor of the universe cavity. The universe is a cavity that's heated in ice. Okay, the universe is in a cavity of ice, and we're on the floor under Polaris. And what's happening now is everything, all the ecliptic is moving over us. We're not moving. Aha! Which means that, contrary to what we thought, the age of Pisces, we're not part of it. It just went by. And the age of Aquarius is here now. Now, the way this book describes our universe is that it's in 4 sectors. There's the center, and then there are 4 sectors. HU00, which is actually an infinity sign, sine waves, okay. HU1 and HU2. That's 4 sectors. And we have been in HU2, which is administered by the Guardian Alliance, okay, and Orion is in that sector. And the Anunnaki come from Orion in the sector of HU2. The El-Anu Treaty of the galaxy is part of HU2 and the Guardian Alliance. Now, why did that treaty mandate and allow slavery, human trafficking, human experimentation? Why in the El-Anu Treaty is physical life so cheap? This goes back to HU0. HU0 forgot about seed money and the law of tenfold return. So HU0 went bankrupt. HU1, in order to generate revenue, relied on doubt and questioning to an extreme, which allowed criminality to question the norms and rules of good process and good behavior. And that's why we are where we are now in terms of morality, down in the dungeons of existence, with the methods and the means of social change. If you've looked at the Frankfurt School, if you've looked at the protocols of the Learned Elders of Zion, or the Cloward-Piven plan, or those schools of thoughts of change are all about disrupting and undoing and creating uproar and ending civil order in order to bring about the freeing of the people who don't know anything about civil order. Okay, all right. It's a bad deal. It's a bad deal. So we have to look at our methods for governing to reestablish what does work and to show that what is in use is not helping. Okay, so we have these 3 books written in English that discuss the context in which our Bible fits, in addition to the Sumerian cuneiform tablets of the Anunnaki. And the Anunnaki conquered us, this planet, 300,000 years ago, while it was still a sphere and it was still doing what it was doing in the ecliptic. But Nibiru brought this world down to the basement of the universe cavity. So the Urantia book, the Oahspe, and Voyagers 2 are what I'm going to be working with to create a historical context that our scientism, our scientists, have not noticed the intelligent context of the physical world. They measure the energy, they measure the entropy, they measure the distance, they measure this, they measure that. They have all their toys and their measurements, but they haven't taken intelligence into consideration. All right, of these 3 books, the only one I haven't completely mastered is the Voyagers 2. And that is because there's so much content in it that isn't relevant to anything I know. I just skipped over it. Now, in speaking of universe years, that is to say, any one universe year is 25,772 of our years. It's the precession of the equinox going around once. And it was only 2 universe years ago that the collision between Earth, Nibiru, and Tiamat resulted in our world crashing to this location, knocked off the galaxy ecliptic and onto the floor of the universe cavity. We are now half submerged in ice and water. It was only 1 universe year ago, at the beginning of the age of Pisces, that Yahweh, the planetary sovereign, given by the Urantia book, as we know as God, returned here to survey and repair what damage he could repair at Genesis 1:1. And this is why Genesis 1:1 is so dark, and it's so dank, and it's so like, what happened here? Okay, it was only a half a universe year ago that Noah's flood put an end to the giants ruling this world. So you see, the fact that the Guardian Alliance is not aware of what happened to our world is not a big surprise, because we're only talking about a couple of universe years. But we humans don't live universe years. Okay, now, something that changed when the Earth went from being a sphere going around slowly, like Jupiter goes around slowly and Saturn goes around slowly. Okay. When we crashed, the magnetic engine, which would create a rotation of a sphere, also empowers a planetary body to maintain and create energy. Okay, the magnets create friction, which creates energy. The energy that our world has and gets now is called the Schumann resonance, and it's at 7.83 Hertz regularly, although it does vary somewhat. All right. But because we are now on a still surface, we're no longer moving. All right. What has happened is that at various frequencies, matter precipitates. All right. And here where we are, there are 10 frequencies where matter precipitates, and those are called timelines. And what you're going to be finding out more about is how those timelines, those different timelines, affect human experience when people wink in and out of a timeline. And David Paulides talks about this quite a bit. People that simply vanish, all right? This is part of the Mandela effect, which has been documented quite a bit over the last few years. But the reason we have a Mandela effect now and then is because we have 10 timelines here. And the timelines are simultaneous, but they're at different places because the lower timelines operate more slowly than the higher timelines that go faster. So the higher timelines are further into the future than the lower timelines are. I've given you a picture of that on my timeline. Okay, and I've talked before about the timelines and how the Mandela effect is created when a person precipitates at a different frequency from what they did yesterday or last week because they changed their thinking. And so by changing their thinking, they changed their manifestation and they went poof. Okay, that actually happens, which is kind of exciting because it really disturbs the status quo when people find out that other people are vanishing or appearing or what have you. It's a real problem. All right. So our cosmology needs to be re-examined in light of the history of intelligence on this world. And we do have a competent history of intelligence here to synthesize an intelligent history. We also have experienced a great deal of extraterrestrial intrusions here that occur all the time now, which our government has deemed as unavailable knowledge for us. And so in the second segment of today's program and in the second segment of each program, okay, first segment we're going to deal with cosmology and physics. The second segment, the second 35 minutes, will be socialization and how behavior affects the outcome of history, and how teaching differences to behavior teaches us different outcomes of history. So that will be about socialization and law. And then the third segment, I'm going to talk about personal health, because that too is part of cosmology. How we comport ourselves. You know, there are 3 processes to living a human life. There used to be 2. There used to be just the yin and the yang. Okay, there's the black and the white, the yes and the no, the up and the down, the polarized reality. All right. The newer idea is that there are actually 3 aspects to existence, and that is the intention, the doing, and the outcome. The intention, the doing, and the outcome. Now, one might think that the intention comes first because it is expectation that creates and manifests the reality in the future. That's if you're 5D or 4th D. If you're 3rd D, all right, it's a little different world for 3rd dimensional physical people than for 5th dimensional physical people. 3rd dimensional physical people, they do an action and then they look at what happened and they reflect on what happened and they decide whether they're going to do that action again. That's third dimensional thinking. Fifth dimensional thinking is that you already know what to expect. So your intention creates the action that produces the outcome you want. That's the difference between third dimensional thinking, where you don't know what outcome to expect, and fifth dimensional thinking, where you do know what outcome to expect. And so there's a lot to deal with, both in social interactions and physical body interactions, to deal with both of those different ways of thinking. Now, the fifth dimensional way of thinking is taught in Masonic orders and in occult orders and in chivalric orders. And we'll get into that, what fifth dimensional thinking, how it works, so that when we're in a group of people who are already knowledgeable about how things work, then we can produce a consensus that will manifest the outcome that the whole group wants to experience. But if we're at the third dimension physical level, which is to say we're at the level of the body response to either chemistry or electronics or emotion, all right, then we have to go back to the third dimensional process method of experimental existence, which in philosophy is called phenomenology. How did that bite feel? Okay, all right. So we'll do phenomenology in third dimensional problem solving, and we do fifth dimensional problem solving in larger social spheres like the political scene. Okay, so we'll be talking about methods and how different methods produce different outcomes. And I will constantly be bringing in how the whole subject of discipline and habit and behavior affects social situations, societies, and long-term history. Because it's behavior that makes history. It's not thoughts that make history. The Enlightenment didn't do anything to create a history. It was the feeling in the gut that something was unjust or wrong or incorrect. It's the guts that tell us when something has to be changed. It's not the thoughts in one's mind. Our response to reality is not a head trip. It's a body trip. We'll be talking about that some more too. Okay, so for now, I'll just go through how we can proceed with this enormous topic. The changes to Earth since our demolition derby with Nibiru and Tiamat have left the scientific community in a very bad situation with respect to what they ought to be teaching, because they know that Earth was supposed to be a sphere that is riding on the ecliptic with all the other spheres. But somehow the collision with Nibiru and Tiamat didn't get communicated to our people. The Bible doesn't mention it, although it talks about the repairs that had to be made in Genesis 1:1 to make this world habitable where we are now. But the text never alludes to the event of the collision itself. That only comes from the Sumerian cuneiform tablets. It doesn't come from the Guardian Alliance. It does also come from the Flat Earth movement, who show us that our world has a flat horizon. There is no demonstrable curvature to any horizon unless you have a GoPro, a fisheye camera, okay? And the Dr. Auguste Piccard, proved in 1931 that the horizon was indeed flat when he sent his balloon up to 50,000 feet, and he described the world as being flattish with turned up edges. All right. So we have a lot of controversy that is generated in the political dimension and in the scientific dimension, because there's a doctrine that says elites are the only ones who get to know the real truth. The regular, ordinary people are too stupid or too uninteresting. We don't want to mess up their minds with the uncomfortable truths of actual facts. And George Herbert Walker Bush actually said that to me. Back in 2001 to 2004, I used to belong to a Buzz, which was the New York Times chat forum for those 4 years. And George Herbert Walker Bush with his doppelgangers used to hang out there, Bruce D. particularly. And so I saved the whole transcript of everything he said to me, because his perspective on politics and history and what people are able to know was so unique. Basically, he's the one who explained to me how it is and why it is that nothing the establishment tells us about anything is ever true. Nothing they tell us is true. We do live in a Truman Show. And that's because of the decision by the elites to give us fairy tales instead of true information. That's their decision. And I'm hoping that by bringing these books and this information out to people generally, we the people will recognize that we have been lied to an extent. The deceit and treachery is so deep. We have been lied to an extent that it's time, enough is enough. We need to correct the historical record. We need to have a correct chronology, because there is evidence to show. Chronologists are telling us that around the 14th century or the 3rd century, 1,000 years either got subtracted or added to our calendar. All right. So our chronology is not correct. All right. Our moon is local and the sun is artificial and local. The sun's not 93 million miles away. All right. And nothing we get about our geography is simple and clear and correct. And it's time for that problem to be fixed. And more people need to know that we are the objects for whom the elites have created fables and mythologies, which are centrally dished out. And that's why they're so consistent. They're so perfectly consistent. The scientism is perfectly consistent with the big pharma and allopathic philosophy of sorcery instead of actual physical healing. What it takes to physically heal the human body is a lot of rest and care, and sometimes herbs, and sometimes excretion, and sometimes taking in more correct foods. It's more attentive to the method of phenomenology than it is attended to the method of chemistry. And so we need to correct our history, correct our chronology, correct the methods of political and social choice, correct what our schools are teaching our children, because the schools are teaching our children propaganda, and the methods that the children get do not ensure that they can make change or read an ordinary clock, okay, or that they can speak in vocabulary that covers essential functions that humans need to be able to discuss with each other. Okay, our kids don't have a vocabulary. They speak from word salads. That needs to be corrected. Physical healing needs to be corrected. Geography needs to be corrected. It's time that we, the people, say no to the myths and the fables and the lies that we are fed constantly. And so I'm hoping that in this series, we're going to investigate the specific scriptures, the specific passages, the specific topics that have been so long denied to us that actually tell us the truth. We want the truth. We're tired of being pandered to and indulged with false information that sounds reassuring. The coronavirus, as many of us know, is a synthesized, manufactured virus for the purpose of reducing the population on the planet. The philosophy that says human life is a problem that needs to be eradicated, that philosophy is flawed and needs to be replaced with optimism and the methods for producing the kind of life that we all want. We all want a life that reflects harmony, cooperation, and decency. And so if we want that, we're going to have to work for it. It's not going to happen just all by itself. Now, many families are homeschooling, and they're giving the children the best that they have and the best that they need at home. So now I'm going to leave the cosmic domain, and we're going to look at the systems of law and problem solving that are given in society and see how well they're working. Steve, do we have a little music to show?
Yes, if you want some.
Yeah, let's have a little music. And we'll be right back.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right, you're off the microphone.
All right. And I don't have the site up, so I don't have the music to play, but that's okay.
Yeah.
That's okay. Yes, we've had enough of lies. So next is law. Law. And we have plenty of those. And the difference between law and rules. So.
Are you still on Facebook?
Yeah, I'm still on Facebook. I'm still, there. That's just like, I'm looking at who's here. Who's here? We've got a few folks coming by, but I can't look around because if I do, oh, here we go. Yeah, and Chris and Ann and Yvonne and Kristen and Di and whoops. Let me move this. Okay, Di Coley and Tanya and Nick. Okay, Nick and John. All right, okay. So I don't have any questions yet. All right. I'm like an oracle. Yeah, I guess you could call me like an oracle, but basically I'm just a reader who has been reading these books for a long time, and I realized they're all telling the same story. Now, when they're all telling the same story, wait a minute, that means that what we're getting is not the same story as the same story that's in all the books, all right? And so then we realize, okay, we're being told a story that's different from what the historical books have to say. There's a reason. There's a reason why we're getting a different story from what our books can tell us. And that's a choice. That's a decision. That's an intention on the part of the people who control the books. Who controls the books? Well, the Vatican has an enormous library that nobody gets to see into. Okay, the library at Alexandria, I don't know if it burned down or it got mud flooded, but it was the library for the whole human race was destroyed in Greece, in Alexandria. Now, why was that allowed? Why has our human race not been allowed to compile and create its own valid, true history?
Don't need a potty break or anything?
No, I'm fine. I'm fine. Okay.
We're still on break here.
We're still on break here. Okay. Why haven't we achieved a holistic, correct, accurate, time-grounded history? Yes. Okay, and that's for the next section. Why? Okay. And where's the book that talks about the why? I don't have that here. But I only found out that why. You know, you find out little bits and pieces so you can thread together something. I found out that why just, I guess it was last year, when Prison Planet Earth, when the 1947 Roswell transcripts were released, okay, that Lawrence Spencer had originally published as a book in which he merely questioned whether there were actually ETs in the UFOs. He didn't take that information anywhere. He didn't interpret what...
You've got 15 seconds left.
15 seconds left. Lawrence Spencer didn't interpret where the ET's account of history had come from or where it was going.
Okay, you're back on.
Okay, we're back on. We're talking about the domain, Prison Planet Earth. That was just revealed to me a year or so ago. That was part of the 1947 Roswell crash information. And Ariel, the ET informant in that case, had revealed the history of the domain relative to this world, and the fact that a starship had crashed here in, it was either the 300s or the 1300s, depending on what happened to the chronology, okay, and several thousand highly evolved domain souls were left here. And they became the Enlightenment. They became the Renaissance. They became the highly evolved Enlightenment that foresaw that the people would expect and want freedom and human rights and natural rights and a form of government that it was driven by consensus. Now that was not in the Hebrew scriptures. That's not in the Vedas. That's not in any of the prior holy books until the Enlightenment came with philosophy and the pedagogy of analysis. The pedagogy of analysis has done more to change how people think about things than just about any other satanic idea. And it is a very satanic idea that giving the story and how this went and how that went and what they did and what this does and how this works. Okay, these streams of information that we get at university, and each book is its own stream of information, okay? Streams of information drawn, the novels and the movies and the, But whatever happened to the simple teachings of behavior and attitude? They got left behind. The simple teachings of behavior and attitude got left behind due to the Enlightenment. And whereas in those centuries during which the Enlightenment occurred, most people followed the behavior in Scripture devotedly. It was Pilgrim's Progress. People were trained up from childhood to accept an ethic, a morality, an ethos of decency and common sense. But the Enlightenment completely changed how people thought about reality into streams of facts, streams of facts, streams of facts. And the necessity to monitor the causes and effects in behavior got shoved aside only into the law schools and into the judiciary and into the courts. And then what happened, from the time of Henry VIII, when he kicked the Catholic Church out of the UK, and he not only did that, he shut down 800 Christian communities that had been based on sharing, non-monetary communities, probably about 80,000 people that he forced into the money economy in his day, so that those people and their children became the ones who Queen Elizabeth I utilized for the British expansion in her reign, all right, all according to a money economy. Now, the money economy is not run according to law. It is run according to rules and rulings, all right, and statutes. Statutes are not law. Statutes are rules. You got to know the difference. And so since Queen Elizabeth I, Western society has been run on the pedagogy of telling stories and telling stories and telling stories, and on the rules of the money economy. And that's why, and that's how, Western society began its slow decline from the behaviors of holy law, which are to do a good thing and you get a good outcome, refrain from doing a bad thing, you get a good outcome, stop somebody else from doing a bad thing, you get a good outcome, and the Beatitudes of Jesus Christ, which were all about aligning your intentions with your actions so that the good outcome is also a sincere outcome. All right. Those aspects of Christian behavior and decency began being just kind of shoved aside, and the stories and the accounts and the analyses and the new sets of terminologies. One thing I found at university when I was at George Mason, I talk about phenomenology as the method for determining the outcome of behavior, because that's what phenomenology does. It's the behavior itself. All right, that was in my philosophy class, and I did a paper in those days on the phenomenology of diet. All right, how did that bite feel? Okay, yes, and I got an A on the paper because it was kind of an odd approach. Okay, but then I got over to computer science. And in studying computer science and parallel processes and the holistic the holistic universe, I realized that the methodology of parallel processing is phenomenology just put to a different set of vocabulary, a different set of words. It's the same thing in different words. And then later in my graduate program, I rubbed elbows with people in journalism in the School of Public Policy. And in the School of Public Policy, they have disciplines which serve to take large groups of people and put them through a computer assisted process and get to a consensus solution to fix a large problem for a large number of people, which was the same method. Interactive management is the same method as parallel processing in computers, which is the same method as phenomenology and philosophy. But again, it was a whole different set of words. So you have the same method using 3 different vocabularies, and they don't even know that they're using the same method. All right. This is what pedagogy has done to human knowledge, is sequester and specialize each discipline into its own vocabulary so it can't speak to the other disciplines doing similar functions. And this is why the Tower of Babel is essentially the problem we need to fix. The Tower of Babel, with all of the languages going off into different directions, needs to be regulated and regularized so that we have correspondences between languages that are accurate and right on. And that's going to take an analog artificial intelligence, not a binary digital artificial intelligence. Okay. And the problem of different vocabularies has confounded itself in our political systems, because the political systems are tangled up between statute rules and laws and rights, okay? And then you complicate it with more languages, and oh my goodness, it just gets crazy. And that's why our political systems are not operating in order to benefit and harmonize us with each other and each balkanized group with each other group. The teaching of the mainstream media is a divide and conquer. Divide and conquer is a profiteering strategy because drama and conflict is more profitable. It keeps people's interest. It's like the drama on the TV. We want to have some dramatic effects and passion, so we maximize the differences between the ways of thinking in order to show how these differences play out. It gets confusing for our children, and so our children master what they can master, which is relatively easy, which is their little, they master their little machine, and they can do that a lot better than we can, because that's all they're mastering. They don't have to speak to other generations. They're not yet in the workforce where they have to be able to communicate with customer service or with management or with the executives. They don't have the vocabulary to do that. That's where we can sort things out for our children according to law, the laws of cause and effect, the laws of behavior that teach harmony, and the intentions to get behavior and outcomes aligned with intention that produces the harmony and the good effects that we want. These things need to be taught to our children again. They used to be. But in those days, 500 years ago, the beliefs about behavior were attached to dogmas and stuck beliefs about matters of cosmology that we don't even think about anymore. Church dogma was as holy and sacred as the laws of gravity, and as what goes up has to come down. And only now has the church begun to realize that it's been left behind. It's been left behind. The church no longer talks about behavior. The church only talks about labels and classifications of people, and the denial of race, and the denial of outcomes of sexuality, and the denial of outcomes of dishonesty. That's what the church has adopted, is only a small part of the curriculum of life. And this is why many people are voting with their feet. There are a few churches that are hanging on and doing well. The Orthodox is growing like mad, and the Anabaptists are still doing well, but they have a very fixed dogmatic structure that may not be large enough to contain the intelligent minds within their body. But we'll see whether they are able. We'll see whether the churches are able to adapt to the new information about extraterrestrials and unidentified flying objects and galactic treaties, and the necessity of spreading our people out in the universe. I think that's what the Space Force is about, is taking some of our people out to other places, because the elites have decided that they don't want so many people here. Is that a surprise? Well, population reduction is part of the Georgia Guidestones. It has been established as a leadership objective. And Bill Gates talks about it openly, how he wants to use vaccines to reduce the human population, regardless of the suffering and the sickness that those faulted vaccines create, which I think is kind of a bad way to go about it. I would never want to make somebody sick just to get them to die so they wouldn't be here. As one of the Anunnaki kings said, destruction is never a blessing. Life itself is not the problem. We have evidence, if you have ever tuned into New Earth and the mud flood group on YouTube, we have evidence that our world had many more people in the past than our world has now. And it was able to sustain larger populations because its distributive ethic was more equitable. There wasn't just all the money at the top and the people at the bottom dying from starvation and disease and deprivation. That hasn't always been the history of this world, that there has been this extent of suffering. And this is something we can fix if we fix our language, fix our norms, fix our behavior. That's how we get our world back on its feet. And it's not difficult. These objectives are very doable in every language. We just have to start doing it again and have to start paying attention. How it is that we get the leadership who have put over this trick upon humanity, how those leaders leave, and how a new generation of leadership can arise and emerge that is willing to do the work, willing to redo, get the real history and teach the real history, and get the real science and teach the real science, and get the real health and teach the real health. How we do that is going to have a lot to do with the higher minds in this universe, who I'm sure by now they realize that this world is not operating according to their initial expectations. All right. And so they are going to have an influence on how these matters get corrected, whether it is by another mud flood reset. We've had, I believe, 3 mud flood resets in addition to Noah's flood, which was 11,000 some hundred years ago. We've had 3 more mud floods. Oh, and there's also the fire and brimstone variety. In Voyagers 2, I found a list of unnatural disasters from 1935 to 1992, which have been caused by the elites and their connections to ETs who know how to manage the weather. So managing the weather has been going on since 1919. Well, the 1918 flu was an engineered experience. All right. So a lot of the human history going back just 100 years has been dominated by occult ETs and their demonic higher minds that they've brought about or tried to bring about yet another empire. You know, Sumer was an empire, Babylon, Assyria, Greece, Rome, Tartary. These were all empires that operated from the Maritime Admiralty statute rules of mercantilism, commercialism, corporatism, okay? Every one of those empires practiced slavery, human trafficking, human experimentation, and the marketing of human lives. You find that in every single empire that has dominated this world. And this is why I think the domain who got here in either the 300s or the 1300s, whenever they got here and crashed, when they brought forward the Enlightenment, and in the Enlightenment, what was said was, we don't want to be slaves anymore. We don't want to do that kind of thing anymore. We don't want to live in warmongering and a war footing forever, always. We want to come to peace. We want to have the methods to come to peace. This is what the Enlightenment wanted to bring about. All right? And so the members of the domain and the Enlightenment have been opposing and protesting the use of human lives as fodder and chattel for what, about 500 years. And we still haven't got the problem of human slavery licked. And that's because the United Nations doesn't acknowledge or recognize the difference between statute corporate rules versus cosmic law. The United Nations is devoted to making every ideology that calls itself a religion as equal, whether or not the behavior of the people is equivalent or fair or just. All right? The United Nations wants to say that taqiyya, jizya, and jihad in the Quran is just as acceptable as the golden rule: do unto others as you would have them do unto you. Let your yes mean yes and your no mean no. He who is faithful in what is least is faithful also in much. When someone strikes you on the right cheek, give him the left cheek. The United Nations and the Bar Association want to tell us that those laws that permit, aid, and abet and indulge violent and cruel behavior just because they come from a religion are just as valid as the laws that require good behavior. Well, that's stinking thinking, honey. That's stinking thinking. You can't elevate crime to the behavior of a cosmic law and say that it's equal to good behavior. That just doesn't work. No how. It just doesn't work. So we have to recognize that corporate statutes and rules are not holy, sacred laws that work for harmony. And we have to discriminate between behaviors that work for harmony and behaviors that don't work for harmony. Now, one of the things that's happening now that's very interesting is that subsets of humanity are identifying themselves and asking for a place in the sun. I think this is a complicated situation that the cosmos has brought about in order to manifest diversity in a most literal frame of reference. All right, the gender wars we are having now will have outcomes that can be used as standards in the future, even though the gender wars are very, very unpleasant and uncomfortable for us at this time. As you know, there's more than two genders. Our scriptures are based on genealogical bloodlines, all right, simple linked bloodlines. We have the genealogies. Some churches keep genealogies. The purpose of genealogy is to protect the bloodline. The purpose of holy matrimony, a lifelong marriage that continues after the physical life is over, continuing the bloodline, has the purpose of preserving the knowledge of the bloodline. The Johann Sebastian Bach family were all musicians. They were all exemplary musicians, okay? That bloodline held the gift of music. Other bloodlines hold the gift of physical strength or open-mindedness or mathematics. Bloodlines hold strengths that are worth preserving. But there are other people for whom bloodline is not a big deal. All right, there are other people who come here for the experience of experiences. They want to try this and try this and try that. One of the things that we can do for our society is balkanize social groups so they can feel safe among themselves. One of the things that the Muslims have done is create colonies, communities in which they can feel safe among themselves. The Jewish communities, particularly the Orthodox Jewish communities, have done a similar thing. The Amish communities have balkanized. Mennonite, not so much Mennonite, but Hutterites are balkanized. They keep to themselves and they live out their ideology according to their own behavioral norms and standards. They have standards. That needs to be allowed. It needs to be allowed that some people who want to be safe can be allowed to be safe. I don't know, does that sound like a ridiculous idea? That the people who want to be safe, well, the people who want to be safe have standards that they consider safe standards. And they need to be allowed to have dominion over their own standards. What is missing now is that Christianity has given away all of its standards. And so it's safe nowhere. And it's being attacked everywhere because there are no standards anymore, and communities no longer have behavioral standards. Schools do. Schools have behavioral standards. The military has behavioral standards. The monarchy has behavioral standards. but it has become a matter of ridicule. A person who decides and forms behavioral standards that are different from the lowest common denominator on the television, all right? And bullying is a big problem now because standards are being tested, and the timid people are tested constantly by the bullies. And that's part of the psychological profile we have to deal with. All right, so that's what I wanted to talk about today in terms of socialization and what are some of the things we can do to turn the left's insistence and concern and focus from merely disrupting, protesting, boycotting, and creating uproar into a re-examination of our social methods. We have to get rid of the corruption, the bribery, the pay-to-play in government. We have to get rid of the secrecy in government. And unfortunately, our legislatures, the Senate and the House, their campaigns are paid for by money from corporations who are bribing them to write laws to serve the corporations. Okay, so we're going to have a constitutional convention and differentiate between human natural rights and corporate statutes and commercial codes. We're going to need a lot of conventions to bring groups of knowledgeable experts together and decide on the intention to tell the truth and to be honest and to be decent, and let that intention hold sway and root out. Okay, we have to root out the treachery and the sedition and the treason and the bribery and the charity fraud. We have a lot of crimes to root out of our society here in the United States, and I believe that President Trump is on track to make that happen. He is taking steps to confront and eviscerate the deep state, which is the nest where all of these problems generate, all right? The confusion of language by the telling of propaganda, dogma, and fables, and the same false stories over and over again. That's where it starts, okay? The problem of schools teaching children to be insubordinate, disrespectful of the civil order the way it is, and simply to disregard law and order completely. That's what the schools are doing. They're saying that anybody ought to be able to go anywhere and do anything they want. Well, that is not a behavioral standard that is going to hold up under scientific technology, that behavioral standard. As you see in China, we are very, very vulnerable to engineered diseases. And in order to be able and capable of defying engineered diseases and engineered weather, we're going to have to be smarter than they are. And if we're going to be smarter than they are, we're going to have to get smart. We've got to get smart. And so that's what's on the table at the level of society, is getting smart 1A and seeing through the tricks and the games and the lies and the propaganda. All right. So I think I've covered society as much as I need to cover society for this time. And next, the next little segment of this Saturday show is going to be about health and personal health, and how we can begin the process of assessing where we are personally, with the techniques that we have to confront, the medical profession we have to confront, the water, air, and groceries we have to confront, the necessity for hygiene and cleanliness we have to confront. So we'll do that next. Steve, are you with me?
Yes, I am.
Okay, could you put on our other, let's have 5-10 music. Give me a little more music this time. I'm going to go make a real quick break.
Okay.
And then we'll get into health, because health is why a lot of people wanted me to do this. So I'll be back in just a few minutes.
Okay, you're off.
Thank you. I'll be right back. Oh. All right. Just a little pit stop there. I'm wearing my big bird top today, all yellow. Okay. My folks at People's Internet Radio are getting a musical interlude, but here at Facebook, there's no such thing. So I'll just kind of editorialize on the need for attention phenomenologically to health. I have a degree in nutrition education from George Mason University and a master's in conflict analysis. And I personally was born with congenital blood defect called porphyria. And what that is that the long bones where the red blood cells are formed in the first place are faulty, and you don't have the red blood cells you need. So you're always anemic, and you're always tired, and you're always worn out. And so you have to find ways to improve your blood circulation, your blood this, your blood that. So that has been the impetus for me personally to get into health. And so over the years I produced, there you go, By the Grace of Good, Live Long Enough to Endure It All. And what I did when I was working at the Better Health Clinic in Vienna, Virginia, I created questionnaires to ask the patients about this and about this and about this and about that. And the questionnaire became part of what I did to assess my own situation. And so that's what this book is basically, the questionnaires that one goes through in order to assess, well, how well you're doing. You know, what is your metabolic type? What do you eat? A food diary. And of course, the food diary that I used to utilize was made useless and helpless and hopeless in the 1980s by FDA when they changed all the food labels from being useful to being useless. The food labels now are useless, absolutely useless. They tell you absolutely nothing you can use. When they used to tell you a portion of a food had a certain number of grams of carbohydrate, grams of fat, and grams of protein, and then it gave you a little bit of the grams of some of the elements that were in the food. You could do a food profile perfectly fine. It was simple to do. But no, USDA decided to wreck the food labels, and that's what they did. That's what they did. So so I did this little this book that it's kind of a little course in learning, teaching yourself how to be healthy with yourself. Okay. Where are we, Steve? Oh, Steve. He's my producer. He's very kind. He puts up with me. All right, so we're going to start into the assessment process. How far along am I in even knowing how healthy I feel, and what are some of the things I can look at in my own life. I have had a lot of health problems, and my children have had a lot of health problems, and so that gave me the impetus to really look into it. And I found that not only the occult teachings in the Sikh religion, Sikh teaches Tantra, which is the energy body, all right, which isn't taught in the West at all. Vegetarianism does not deal with the matters of pH, the matters of acid-base balance. Macrobiotics does, but just general vegetarianism. And with the deterioration of our food stores, being a vegetarian is something that not everybody can do. Not everybody can get their protein from just vegetable sources. I personally cannot. If I'm just on a vegetable diet, I get very, very, very run down very fast. And so, you have to do what works for you. Now, on this topic of diet, I don't know if you're aware of this, but there is now a cannibal restaurant in Tokyo and another one in Los Angeles, where the people who go there play a game that they consent to, and if they lose the game, they become the meal.
I'm back.
Oh, good, okay. I'm just talking about the cannibal restaurant down in Los Angeles. And
We have a minute left.
okay, the cannibal restaurant is run by the daughter of an occult witch who has a lot to do with the Illuminati, by the name of Somerset, what's her name? Anyway, she runs the House of Wetton.org and an Illuminati, and you watch what the Illuminati are doing, and you find that they think nothing about consuming another human one way or another, whether by a blood transfusion or by fetal cells in a product that they're using, or so that's why when I bring up the topic of social standards.
Oh, okay, you're back on.
I'm back on. When I bring up the topic of social standards, these standards reach all the way down into the individual's behavior with regard to personal health. So I'm going to start with a little introduction, sort of the backstory to the nutrition book, because it'll give you a little context. Okay, this book is a compilation of wisdom I gathered from empirical practitioners over the past 50 years, knowledge not generally available anymore. I'm bringing it out now so people have facts at hand to make rush decisions and quick meals and fortify the soul. I originally wrote this book in pieces. First, it was a paper I wrote for one of my biochemistry professors. Then it was a set of handouts I gave to my customers at Cornucopia Natural Foods in Reston, Virginia, and it became a set of clinical patient questionnaires designed for my nutritionist role at the Better Health Clinic in Brianna, Virginia. Okay, in 2000 I went to work on the nutrition tables and patched together a dual set of tables to show and illustrate how a fast food diet compares to a thrift diet in its effect on circulation and digestion. The tables have sat on my computer hard drive for many years, and until now I finally got the tables included in the book. Okay, Principles of Nutrition as a Thinking Set of Tools becomes a primary guide for what we buy, prepare, and serve, and it helps us to keep people well and strong. Okay, now the human body is not just a physical manifestation. There's an electrical field around the human body, and the quality and the kind of things you put in your mouth affect the electrical qualities as well. So the body is a kernel of a larger cosmic soul, just as the kernel in the army is where missions and actions run out of the officer's intention. The human aura is a statement about the intention of the kernel of the soul that we call mind. Mental body is 4 layers out from the biological body, which means mentations of a soul are affected by physicality, by karma, and by emotions. When we ingest what we call food, we are building the whole potential of the soul, and this is why behind the need for elemental particles among our nutrients. But science has disturbed and changed the picture. For the last couple of centuries, 2 different methods for study have predominated: scientific and empirical. Now, the scientific is telling the theory of operation, and the empirical is here, eat this, see what happens. Okay. In the scientific method, control is kept over every factor involved in observations, and the purpose of an experiment is to be able to generalize about and duplicate the results. In empirical science, however, practiced for thousands of years in India and China, cause and effect relationships have merely been observed, correlated, and recorded in their natural settings one by one, phenomenologically. Okay. Neither is there a need to control the factors involved, nor is there a need to duplicate the results. Merely are tendencies noted. General human tendencies are useful. However, most of us seem to exhibit a combination of tendencies, which generally means most of us eat most food most of the time. But there are exceptions, and exceptions are important because these are people who are discovering their physiological limits. It's certainly very common that different people in the same family have very different needs. The household cook needs to keep some universal principles in mind. Okay, what goes around comes around describes spiritual justice. You are what you eat describes feeding as a form of physical justice. If there's nothing to eat, drink water, clean water. The next section discusses ways to filter out your water if its source is unknown, and water filtration systems abound now because our water is so polluted. The ideal human diet for those who have experienced glut for a long time is a sequence of step questions when hunger sensation occurs. If you've been glutting for a long time, okay, now you stop and think about what you're doing. Will plain water allay the hunger for a while? How about tea? Or how about broth? Would a piece of fruit or root or stalk stave off further discomfort? Is there a handful of nuts or seeds available? Would a soup or salad meal feel okay? If none of these feels enough, then a protein meal is called for in one of 2 ways. Mixed vegetable proteins, potatoes, beans, cabbage, grains, and dairy, or a flesh food with a little wine, with greens, or beans, or dried fruits. Okay. The way diet plays out in the macro over large numbers of people. If you want large, aggressive, strong people, you have meat with beer and wine with milk together. Okay, the Watusis and Scandinavians are both very big because they have meat and milk together. Semites, Jewish people, because they never have meat and milk together, are smaller, but they're more sturdy. They live longer. Okay. If you want small, timid, long-lived people, never eat meat with milk together and stay away from beer and wine. If you want to promote psychic gifts and ungovernable behavior, eat no animal products and get your stamina from ginseng. And this is what happens when a person becomes a vegan. If you want to promote diversity, arrange foods so the people can choose. If you want to promote purity, for good or whatever, make everybody eat the same thing. If you want to promote longevity, serve sweets, salts, and fat only at festival, and serve meat only once a week or in the winter and spring when you can't grow things. That way animals live 6 days of the week without fear. Some animals we eat. We eat the stupid animals. Some animals we show compassion on their intelligence and we leave them alone. Metabolic type. There is a test to see what your metabolic type is. And the test that I have, and I will make a copy of it for you and email it to you if you ask me for it, because I can always get a copy. This test was developed by a Dr. Kelly in a cancer clinic about 15 or 20 years ago, and I ripped it off. Okay. And it places you as either a vegetarian, an omnivore, or a carnivore, according to your natural tendencies, what you inherited. Okay. And so you can tell what you digest most readily, and what you digest most readily is what you ought to be eating. Duh. All right? All right? What you digest is what you ought to be eating, right? All right? And in the combinations that it's digestible. Macrobiotics talks about this. And some vegan and vegetarian books talks about this, but of course they don't go into the meat eating part of it. All right. There are some foods that are compatible together. There are some foods that are not compatible together. All right. And it reminds me of a meeting I went to it was at a conference table. And the boss supplied a wonderful table of refreshments while we were discussing whatever we were discussing. We had dried fruits, and we had fresh raw vegetables, and we had nibblies and crackers and cheese, and we had a little bit of everything. And the one who ordered the meal didn't know that you never, ever serve raw or dried fruits and raw vegetables at the same time. It's a no-no, okay? So everybody's munching along, and all of a sudden the farting started. This is a corporate meeting. And we're getting these strained looks on people's faces because they were munching on fresh strawberries and carrots and broccoli and celery with cheese. Okay. Everybody had gas. Everybody was, well, it was embarrassing for the whole group. Okay. So the rules go like this. Melons you eat alone without anything. Milk is best digested alone by itself, but it can be combined with grains and vegetables, okay, with tiny amounts of flavored fruit, all right. But you don't combine meats with grains and vegetables at the same time, because that's an undigestible wad of stuff. Now, you know from chemistry, when you went to high school, there are acids and there are bases, okay? The bases have more oxygen and the acids have more hydrogen. And when you mix them together, you get salt and water. So if you eat your acids and bases together, you get salt and water, which does not digest very well. So you want to eat your meats with foods that will facilitate the digestion of the meat, which would be greens, beans, and wine or beer. If you're having dairy products, you can have grains with the dairy products and the vegetables. But if you add meat to that, it becomes an undigestible wad for you to deal with. Just those simple, basic combining rules makes a big difference in your ability to digest what you put in front of yourself. All right? So this is how we go about assessing our own health status, is looking at what we do and what are the effects that we get from what we do. And what I always suggest for everybody is to have a little notebook and write down what you did. Okay, write down what you put in your mouth. Write down how it felt. Write down what happened next. That way, you're doing a phenomenological imperial analysis of how well things work for you. All right? And so, it's come up on an hour and a half. Steve, are you there?
Yes, I am.
Good. All right. Okay, I have introduced the idea of how we are going to get healthier. We're going to analyze the outcomes of our behaviors, not only what we choose, what we ingest, but also how we get rid of the byproducts. Getting rid of the byproducts is the topic for next time. And so I've introduced the topic of health, and I hope you'll bring me your questions. We'll deal with congenital issues and chronic issues, because that's what most of us are struggling with. We're struggling with aging and what we inherited from our grandparents. So I think I've gone long enough today. This has been Emily Craig, and this is History Reset. We want to reset our history so we don't repeat the same mistakes over again. I'll see you next time. Okay, I have let my